Happy 2025, everyone, and welcome back to the Double Blue, Green, and Red podcast reviews after a long break. I'm Gabenator.
I'm Henry.
I'm Gordon.
And I'm James, and today we'll be reviewing how the Revenant Theory works in the Stories of Sodor.
Before we begin, I would also like to say that this review will also cover Victor Tanzig's Stories of Sodor Season 6, as well as a bit of the SCPs of Sodor.
Aye, and speaking of the latter, Season 6 was a nice season, better than the darkness of 1965 from Season 5, I must say.
Well, yes, I do agree about that, although its episode was still a little shorter than the Stories of Sodor seasons before its fifth one.
It also feels different without Thomas there, as well as the fact that Sir Topham had retired and the Narrowgager's boss, Sir Handel Brown, passed away.
I know it's different, Gordon, but remember, Thomas is only gone for now, and retirement and passing away is a part of life.
Aye, things in life change, usually for the better, and it's not like Sir Topham had his left completely. He's still around on Sodor, just not as involved as he was before.
I guess that's one way to think of the silver lining to it, and the new controllers, Roland Watson and Mr. Mannering, are nice chaps.
Fair point. If anything, they're basically the good and/or reformed version of Basil Corbett and Giles Freeman from Season 3.
And speaking of controllers, Victor told me that while Sir Topham has kids or grandchildren won't later become Sodor's new controller, he does have plans for introducing a female controller.
You mean like Emily Helen Hatt from Wildnorwester Sodor the modern years?
Probably, but both are stories for another day.
Then why don't you get you with this story, you botherheads?
What the Who?
Wait, aren't you Inspector Eliza from the Stories of Sodor?
One and only.
Hold on, how did you tune into our podcast without the phone ringing?
Railway Inspector, remember? I have my ways, although I know to have the phone ring but often they hit the wrong key. My mistake. But it would be nice to be your guest speaker for this review, seeing as I wasn't in Seasons 5 or 6.
That certainly has to be irony in steel.
Play on word puns? Really?
Oh, come on, can't you take a joke?
Said the engine who tarred himself that the saying his paint never gets dirty.
You dare stoop to that? At least I'm not the one that's painted like tar.
Why you red-headed?
Okay, now that we've overcome that steam pressure, for those of you who don't know what the Revenant Theory is in the Stories of Sodor, it's the theory that all non-faceless vehicles and rolling stock in that universe are the reincarnations of humans who passed away.
And that theory was officially proven in the very first SCP of Sodor miniseries episode, Past of the Dead, where Boko was revealed to be reincarnated from a man called Bobby Cooper.
If I remember, Bobby Cooper reincarnated the Boko after entering the Past of the Dead's cave, although he didn't remember his life as a human after doing so.
Does that mean every non-faceless vehicle or rolling stock in the Stories of Sodor came to life every time a human entered that cursed cavern?
I don't think so, Eliza. It's connected to, but not the full reason for the mechanical reincarnation.
I agree. That supernatural cavern has been around since medieval times, and there were no railway locomotives or rolling stock back then, so it couldn't be the reason for the mechanical reincarnations.
Aye, and don't forget, that cavern was cursed to bring back the dead if any fearlessly stupid humans entered before their time to pass away naturally.
Indeed, but that piece of evidence, along with me looking into it more thanks to Season 6 of the Stories of Sodor, is how we deduce the 5 parts of how the Revenant Theory works. Looking into the biology of non-faceless vehicles, while their metallic bodies are nothing like humans, it is clear that any sudden impact, not counting explosions or rockfalls, that cracks the wrong parts of their interiors can be fatal to the vehicle.
When you say crack the wrong parts, which ones do you mean?
We don't know, James. Non-faceless vehicle biology, especially the interiors, are complex. But as Gabenator just said in longer words, we're not immortal even from crashes sometimes.
Indeed, if anything, the bodies of non-faceless vehicles and even rolling stock are pretty much their respiratory system, which is why breaking the important interior parts would be fatal to them.
Aye, after all, you saw what happened to poor Jeffrey when he stuffed it from that pipe on a hill back in Season 5. Not to mention that troublemaker Dudley was killed from a diesel missing a red signal in Season 6.
Don't remind us. I remember hearing from Joey that you could literally see Dudley's boiler spitting from his cab after the accident.
Ew, I'm really glad that engines don't bleed or show organs.
Ugh, James?
Besides that, what about the time Edward burst his boiler because of a faulty signal? Or what about the time when you almost died, Henry, if not for Robert Hall fixing you back in Season 5?
I think that was more extreme luck that it wasn't instantly fatal, Gordon. but both further show how metallic age and parts are biologically connected to how the non-faceless are alive. However, there is one more factor in non-faceless biology that correlates to the Revenant Theory.
Oh? And what's that?
Their minds. While non-faceless engines or rolling stock don't have brains, it turns out they don't need to. Research into the minds shows that you don't need a brain to think.
Really? Even for humans? But I thought humans can't live without a brain.
Aye, but that's because the brain is the control console for all parts of a human body to work, and connects the mind to the body's nervous system.
Indeed, and just like humans, non-faceless vehicles have a nervous system of some kind, which was specifically shown in the Season 6 episode Recovery.
Specifically with Henry and Percy from that series?
Well, the traumas of 1965 did stand out in both a sad and over-upset way.
Aye, in that story, I felt so guilty for inadvertently causing Rob's unstable brother to go on a murderous rampage spree, which in turn made Percy so distraught about losing his best friend that he began lashing out and having hallucinations of Thomas's destroyed body.
Indeed, and just like with humans, a traumatic life-threatening event can push a non-faceless vehicle's metallic nervous system outside its ability to regulate itself, as well as give the vehicles hallucinations.
And what happened in Recovery is proof that an engine's smoke box has some kind of life biology flowing through their smoke boxes?
It might be a little different for non-faceless diesels and rolling stock, but yes, that pretty much describes and connects it to the Revenant Theory.
And speaking of Recovery, that has to be a number 5 ranked episode of Season 6, simply because of how well it handled overcoming extreme trauma.
For the first time today, I actually agree with you, James. And in addition to that, Recovery also shows an example with Percy of how the destined disasters of 1965 could have been prevented.
Aye, Percy lashing out at everyone and having hallucinations of Thomas was similar to what happened with Sean Hall after his and Rob's mother committed suicide.
Indeed, but unlike that psycho, and while it was hard, Percy got help and was able to overcome his mental breakdowns thanks to Derek and Toby.
And the former was also able to help Henry, partly thanks to Rob, overcome his fear and guilt of what happened with the flying kipper accident that killed the latter's father all those years ago, which in turn led to the events of 1965.
Aye, and if there's anything Recovery taught us, it's that forgiveness and properly sharing one's feelings goes a long way to overcoming guilt or resentment.
Something that us non-faceless vehicles seem to be really good at working through.
Looking next at another part of the Revenant Theory process to work, it is likely that the vehicle or rolling stock that comes to life has to be built with materials from Sodor.
Wait, are you saying that all the non-faceless in Victor Tanzig's universe was specifically built with materials from Sodor?
Not intentionally, but yes. And if I had to guess, the non-faceless vehicle or rolling stock have to be about 80 to 90% Sodor materials in order for them to come to life.
Cool. That sounds a little too ridiculous to be true, Gabenator.
Indeed! After all, how can one workshop be so coincidental yet accurate with building an engine, vehicle, or rolling stock with materials from Sodor and not know they did so?
Well, regarding your doubts, I should also mention Corporal Kyle Proteus, whose soul was able to be contained in a random ordinary train lamp.
Aye, that's right. The lamp was metallic, and if it was made from Sodor's materials, which the island had supernatural occurrences, that would explain the amplification of Kyle's good luck and sensing someone in trouble.
Huh, I guess that would make sense, but that never really happened with anyone else, has it?
Yeah, why didn't the engines who died in World War II or 1965 preserve their souls like Kyle?
Probably because anything metallic or built with materials from Sodor was destroyed or severely cracked, which rendered them useless to contain anything supernaturally spiritual. You know, this just gave me a thought about Thomas.
Wait, are you saying?
Yeah, since Thomas was barely alive after the explosion and in the works where many fresh parts were, it's possible anything metallic that were placed in him or were near him could have helped preserve his soul just like it did with Kyle.
Victor Tanzig didn't confirm that to you by any chance, did he?
No, he didn't. But it's a possibility given our insight research into the Revenant Theory, James.
Huh, hard to argue with that. But back to the topic at hand, it's still a little hard to believe that a works could unintentionally yet accurately create a non-faceless with pure materials from Sodor.
Well, Gordon, that's probably the reason only certain vehicles or rolling stock come to life after a first firing or push.
Aye, if anything, this part of the Revenant Theory also kind of supports the chemical reaction theory too.
Chemical reaction theory? Sorry, you'll have to refresh me on what that is.
It was a theory that non-faceless vehicles come to life through some chemical reaction when they are turned on for the first time. And for a while, that was a generally accepted theory, until the arrival of non-faceless rolling stock, which are not turned on in any way.
Aye, but pushing them wakes them up from maintenance, so maybe that causes chemicals in their semi-stationary bodies to react to each other, which sparks life.
Indeed, But besides that point, there is one more thing that I think a non-faceless needs in order to come to life.
Oh? And what's that?
They need to have about 10 or 20% of a chemical called ABS.
AB what?
ABS, the stuff that a non-faceless vehicle or rolling stock's face is made of. Its official word is a bit of a mouthful, so it's just better to call it ABS.
I totally agree. But if I'm understanding this correctly, what you're saying is that this ABS is the most important part of a non-faceless in order for them to come to life?
Yes indeed, Gordon, and while not proven, it is highly likely that the island of Sodor itself is rich in that chemical within their coal, oil, or metal minerals.
That honestly could explain why there are more non-faceless vehicles and rolling stock in the UK than other parts of the Stories of Sodor's world.
Hi, you know, I just had a thought relating to this part of the Revenant Theory's process.
Oh? About what?
Remember how Barry and Donald underwent steam diesel conversion?
Yes, not that I'm interested in undergoing anything like that.
Well, despite the latter's teething troubles due to Donald's older age in the episode Leadership, it was resolved, and both engines underwent that on Sodor itself.
Ah, I see what you're getting at. It only worked with the non-faceless steam engine's metal biology and parts possibly because both were likely built with materials on Sodor that had ABS.
Aye, you read my mind, Gabinator.
And speaking of reading minds, do we all agree that the episode Leadership is the number 4 episode of Season 6?
I do agree, Gordon. Despite the surprise and slight disappointment of Sir Topham Hatt retiring, it was pretty much inevitable given how many years he's been Sodor's controller in the Stories of Sodor.
Aye, and despite the new controller, Roland Watson, not being so keen on old-timers, he soon began to work alongside Sodor's engines and made the railway more efficient for the years to come.
For the third part of the Revenant Theory, it's that Sodor is possibly rich in ectoplasm throughout the entire island.
Ectoplasm. If I recall, isn't that a spiritual energy substance that helps ghosts form into shape and powers?
Well, it's still a mystery in study, but yes, that is the general idea of ectoplasm.
And you're saying that the island of Sodor is completely filled to the border with this ghostly energy?
Well, when you think about it, Gordon, it does explain the reason for the ghosts of Arthur and Dominic that haunted the island.
Aye, I also think the ridiculousness and slightly bad safety record in the Stories of Sodor connect to that ectoplasm fact.
Still, while I'm on board with you all, I'd still desire that Sodor is the only place rich in it.
Well, think about it. Sodor has existed since medieval times, and the king and a few people supposedly had supernatural artifacts that possibly harnessed life-giving powers. But the one that's the most connected to the Revenant Theory is the cavern we discussed at the start of this podcast.
But I thought it wasn't the full reason for mechanical reincarnation to a non-faceless.
The key word is not the full reason, meaning it's not directly responsible for it, but rather connected to the spiritual ectoplasm energy that surrounds Sodor.
Indeed, and remember the rule of that cavern?
Aye, if life ended before its time, the dead would return?
Exactly. And Eliza, all the non-faceless engines or rolling stock you've met and or put in Railgate, did any sound or seem like a 5-year-old or extremely old elder person?
Not that I've seen. Even ones with juvenile demeanors or those with older demeanors are not too totaling or elderly young or old.
Bingo! That shows that the rules of the Path of the Dead cavern apply to when a non-faceless vehicle or rolling stock is built and turned on or moved for the first time. Only those who died an untimely, unnatural death at the right young or middle age, on or near Sodor, are the ones who reincarnate.
But what about Mrs. Fletcher from Season 6's episode Musician? She was still a middle-aged woman before her time, yet she didn't reincarnate into a non-faceless.
I've heard about her. She was a teacher who lived in one of the Mid-Sodor Railways villages with her husband Horace Fletcher until he died at sea in 1941. Mrs. Fletcher was then killed not too long after from a blitz on Sodor during World War II.
Aye, and yet she was able to stay as a human ghost waiting for her husband on the riverbank and playing sad piano songs at the end of each day, just like she did when she was still alive.
If I had to guess, Mrs. Fletcher's love for her husband was so pure and strong that it allowed her soul to stay put where she was for all those years.
And surprisingly, her house was also shown to be a ghost when it disappeared at the end of Musician.
Indeed, but if anything, that further proves the idea that materials from Sodor have life properties in them.
Aye, and speaking of Musician, it definitely ranks 3rd place in Season 6.
I definitely agree, and when I first saw that story, I was shocked to learn that Mrs. Fletcher was a ghost, as well as how well the locals, if not the entire island, accepted her just being there.
Indeed, but the best thing about that episode is that from what I heard, Mike of the Arsdale Valley was able to help Mrs. Fletcher move on.
And all it took was Mike telling Mrs. Fletcher about a lady he knew from his old rally named Matilda, who lost a soldier she loved during the war and lived depressed for the rest of her life just like the former.
I can only hope that Mrs. Fletcher reunited with her husband after she let go and moved on to the afterlife.
I'm sure she did, James. I have a feeling she did. Going back to the whole materials from Sodor and supernatural spirit energy of the island, I think the metal rails that connect both Sodor and the UK are another factor for the reincarnation process to work.
What do you mean by that, Gabinator?
Well, rails are metallic with wooden sleeper supports, just like locomotives as well as plank and steel rolling stock. And since they are maintained often, isn't there a chance that they are replaced with new ones whose materials were created from Sodor's resources?
Oh, I get it. You were saying that like the non-faceless vehicles, most of the rails are also likely made with pure materials from Sodor which have life properties. And because of that, it serves as a pathway for the young souls on Sodor or UK who lost their lives too soon.
They don't call you an inspector for nothing, Eliza.
Aye, she's diligent. And I guess that theory would explain why there are lots of non-faceless engines in Britain than other countries.
Can't argue with that. But what about the non-faceless road, air and water vehicles? Do the rails connect to them?
If I had to guess, next to needing to be built almost perfectly with materials from Sodor, the non-rail vehicles also need to be near a railway line when their first firing happens.
I guess that would explain the vehicles and rolling stock in the episode's losses in Arlesdale, why there were so many lorries and buses, yet Onslow and Birdie were the only non-faceless ones, not to mention why the Arlesdale miniature coaches had faces when they didn't need to.
And regarding losses in Arsdale, I think it's safe to say those two have earned second place in the best episodes of Season 6.
Aye, it was nice to see the Arsdale engines and railway for the first time in the Stories of Sodor, as well as the slight restoration of what used to be the Mid-Sodor Railway.
I agree, but I actually like losses more because despite it looking like the SKR would close because of the roads taking work like the Mid-Sodor did, the SKR has no control on Mr. Mannering and the road companies found a way to cooperate and make it beneficial for both.
It was also nice to see Onslow's talk with Stewart, relating to how he too lost not one but several homes because of work shortening out. He also taught both Stewart and us an important lesson.
That such is life, and while things change, it's not always so bad and we must just accept it.
You read my mind, Eliza. Finally, the last and most important part of the Revenant series process to work is the strength and limits the original human had before becoming a non-faceless vehicle or rolling stock.
Strengths and limits of humans? I'm pretty sure they're nothing compared to locomotives, Gabinator.
You're right, but think about it this way, Gordon. Both you, Henry, and James can pull the Express, yet you're the only one that can do it the best. Why is that?
Well, as much as I enjoy pulling the Express, I can't exactly go as fast as Gordon to keep the time.
Yeah, I remember how in the depression years of the Stories of Sodor you tried and needed bootlaces to fix the coaches.
Hey, different universe, and that was partly because the coaches were overdue for maintenance to save money.
Moving on, in my case, I am capable of keeping up with Gordon's express time speed, but I don't have the same stamina he does.
Not to mention, you being strong for goods trains means if you're too rough with the coaches, you'll shatter your glass.
That too.
And there you go. Like humans, non-faceless vehicles are different in who they are and what their talents are. And while they can be slightly modified and adapt to do more than what they were made for, it doesn't change who they were and are.
Makes sense. I was a shunter before I joined the Railway Inspectors Unit, where I learned a lot about the law. Maybe I studied to be an officer in a past life.
Perhaps in my past life I was a racer or athlete.
Maybe I could have been a fisherman that had back problems, given my original build's problems as well as the fact I like pulling the flying kipper.
Well, I'm not sure what I did in my past life, but I can say that in the Stories of Sodor, Stewart of the SKR was probably a mathematician in his past life due to his uncanny ability to solve math problems so simply. Toby could have been a lawyer or an advisor of some kind, and Mickey is a natural firefighter and therapist, so he possibly could have been the same in his past life.
And also, in relation to the Stories of Sodor episode limits that helped me come up with this part for the series, Daisy the Diesel railcar could have been a woman in a wheelchair before she reincarnated.
Wait, what? How can that be?
Actually, that makes sense, given the fact in that episode, she couldn't bank, shunt or pull trains like the others could despite having buffers and coupling rods.
Aye, but being confined to a wheelchair would mean Daisy has first-hand experience being gentle when they ride inside her.
Indeed, Victor also told me that Daisy could pull some coaches, so as long as they're not too much or too heavy.
Speaking of limits, can I go on a limb and guess that it's the #1 episode of Season 6?
Alongside Season 6's finale adjustment.
Despite the fact that the Season 6 finale involves crookedness, an accidental death by outrage, and forcing my partners Joey and Lenny to resign.
Well, those were bad, but the situation would have probably escalated to something worse anyway.
You're probably right, Gordon. And in any case, Joey and Lenny did find a new purpose in life, with the latter repainting himself blue and joining Sodor's railway on the Fafakpa branch, and the former joining Derek in the fire and rescue service.
Speaking of which, with them resigned, are you going to be Sodor's new main police engine, Eliza?
I don't know, but if that does happen, I hope all the crooked coppers have been dealt with, or I'll resign and find a new lease on life too.
Well, good luck then, Eliza. But back to the topic, Limits and Adjustment are Season 6's #1 best episodes simply because of how they teach us to always stay true to ourselves and that even bad changes can have a great silver lining.
As one would say in different words, when life switches you down a different track, explore it.
Just like when instinct switched you off the main line and got me to pull the express, Gordon?
Oh, shut up, James.
Who's that character? It's Eliza! Alright, now that we've gone over the Revenant series parts in Season 6, any last questions before ending today's podcast?
Aye, the non-faceless engines that reincarnate in foreign countries such as America, how does that work when they are so far apart from Sodor?
Next to the Sodor material theory, it's possible that non-British immigrants who live on Sodor and the UK, such as Sir Handel's German mother, reincarnate to their original homeland after their passing away.
That makes sense, but it's a 1 in 1,000 chance of happening, isn't it?
Especially since their bodies need to be almost perfectly made from Sodor's resources.
But what about Jordi Cuba? While this was classified information, he came to life from some mem saying a ritual that summoned lightning which gave him life and superpowers.
While I'm not 100% sure, it's possible those men might be descendants of Sudrian people who knew how to deal with supernatural things, and their ritual, combined with Cuba's body possibly being 100% purely made from materials from Sodor, is what forcefully reincarnated all of those men into that one supernatural engine.
And with all that out of the way, we all hope you liked our review of how the Revenant Theory works.
If you have any more thoughts on it, or have a suggestion for a future podcast, sound off down below in the comments.
Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Eliza, for being our guest speaker today.
It's been an honor.
And that's all we've got for today. So until next time, stay awesome.